Hello, dear listeners, and a warm welcome to Soft History, the quiet place where we sit together and let the past unfold slowly, one gentle moment at a time. Tonight, imagine standing on the shore of a wide lake high in the mountains. Just as the sun begins to rise, the water is calm and silver, and out in the middle of it, where you would expect to see nothing but reeds and birds, there stands a great white city of stone, its temples climbing toward the sky and its long roads reaching across the water like outstretched arms. This was Tenochtitlan, one of the largest cities in the entire world 500 years ago, and it was built by a people who once owned nothing at all, who wandered for years with no land to call their own. How a homeless and unwanted people could raise such a wonder upon a swamp is one of the strangest and most beautiful stories in all of history. This is the story of the Aztecs and of the lake that became the center of their world. It is a story about patience and cleverness, about turning mud into farmland and water into a road, about a small group of outsiders who climbed all the way to the top of a vast empire. It is also a story about how quickly even the greatest things can fall. We will travel from a humble island in a marsh to a glittering capital of stone, and finally to the days when strangers from across the sea arrived and changed everything. Through all of it, we will move slowly, the way the morning mist moves over still water, taking our time to see and feel each part of the journey. But before we go any further, I want to take a moment. On this channel, we explore fascinating subjects in calm and careful detail. These journeys are made to help you relax, focus, or simply enjoy the flow of discovery. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Is it day or night where you are? What time is it? Are you tuning in while studying, working, commuting, or simply winding down? Drop your answer in the comments below. It is always wonderful to hear from you. And if you enjoy content like this, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. It helps us bring you more of these journeys. Now let us go back to the very beginning, to a time long before the white city rose from the water, when the people who would build it had no home at all. The Valley of Mexico was a place of lakes and mountains, sitting high above the sea, where the air was thin and cool. 5 great lakes filled the bottom of the valley, joined together into one wide, shining sheet of water that stretched for miles. Around the edges of these lakes stood many cities, some of them old and powerful, built long before by people whose names had already begun to fade. The land near the water was rich and green, and whoever held it grew strong. This was a crowded and contested world, where every good piece of ground already belonged to someone, and where newcomers were rarely welcome. Into this world, sometime in the 1200s, came a wandering people who called themselves the Mexica. They had traveled a long way from the north, from a place they remembered only in stories, a place called Aztlan, which is where the name Aztec would later come from. They were poor and few in number, dressed in rough clothes and carrying little. They had no city, no fields, and no king with a great palace. What they had instead was a god they carried with them, a fierce god of the sun and of war named Huitzilopochtli, whose name was hard to say even for those who worshipped him. Their priests told them that this god had promised them a homeland of their own one day, a place they would know by a special sign. So they kept walking, year after year, searching for the place the god had spoken of. The road was hard for the Mexica, and the people who already lived in the valley did not make it easier. Wherever the Mexica tried to settle, the local rulers pushed them away or treated them as servants. They were seen as rough and dangerous, a people of warriors with strange customs, and no one wanted them as neighbors. They were given the worst land, the rocky hillsides and the snake-filled marshes that no one else would touch. They worked for other cities, fought in other people's wars, and took whatever scraps were offered to them. Imagine moving from town to town your whole life, never owning the roof over your head, always being told that you do not belong here, that you must move on once again. That was the life of the Mexica for many long years, and it taught them hard lessons in patience and survival. Yet through all of this, The Mexica held tightly to the promise their god had made. Their priests carried the image of Huitzilopochtli at the front of every journey, and they listened for his voice in their dreams. They believed that their suffering was only temporary, that one day they would find the sign and claim a place that was theirs alone. This belief gave them strength when there was little else to hold on to. It made them tough and determined, willing to endure insults and hardship because they trusted that something better was waiting. They learned to fight well, to survive on little, and to keep going when others would have given up. In a way, their years of wandering were not wasted at all, because they shaped the Mexica into a people who could turn even the worst land into a home. By the early 1300s, the Mexica had drifted to the very edge of the Great Lake, into the territory of a powerful city that ruled the western shore. Once again they were unwelcome, and once again they were given poor land and treated as outsiders. They were running out of places to go. The valley was full, every shore was claimed, and the Mexica were tired from their endless searching. They needed a home, and they needed it soon, before they were pushed out entirely or scattered to the winds. It was in this moment of need, when their situation seemed almost hopeless, that the sign their God had promised finally appeared, and the place where it appeared was one that no one else in the entire valley would ever have wanted. The sign came to them in the marshy shallows of the lake, in a place where small islands of reeds and mud rose just above the water. According to the story passed down by the Mexica, their priests saw an eagle perched upon a cactus that grew from a rock, and in some tellings, the eagle held a snake in its beak. This was the sign Huitzilopochtli had promised them, the exact picture their god had spoken of long ago. After all their years of wandering, after all the cities that had turned them away, here at last was the place that belonged to them. It did not matter that the place was a swamp. It did not matter that the ground was soft and wet and crawling with insects. The god had spoken, and the Mexica believed with their whole hearts that this poor patch of marsh was the home they had been searching for across so many lonely miles. We do not know exactly how the moment felt to the people who stood there, but we can imagine it. Picture a group of tired travelers, their feet wet from wading through the shallows, looking out at a small muddy island, surrounded by water on every side. The air would have smelled of damp earth and reeds, and the only sounds would have been the calls of water birds and the soft lapping of the lake. To anyone else, this would have looked like worthless land, a place fit only for frogs and herons. But to the Mexica, it looked like a promise finally kept. There was something in their hearts that lifted, a feeling of arrival after a journey that had lasted longer than anyone could remember. This was the year that we now call 1325. And it would become the most important year in their history. The island had certain advantages that the Mexica would soon learn to use. Because it sat out in the water, it was hard for enemies to attack, surrounded by a natural moat that no army could easily cross. The lake itself was full of fish, frogs, ducks, and other creatures that could feed a hungry people. The water could be traveled by canoe, making it easy to move goods and people. Once the Mexica learned the ways of the lake, what looked like a weakness, a home built on a swamp, would turn out to be a kind of strength. But all of that lay in the future. On the day they arrived, the Mexica had only their faith, their strong arms, and a small island of mud. Everything else they would have to build with their own hands, and the building would not be easy. The first task was simply to survive, and survival on a swamp island is no small thing. The ground was too soft and too wet for the kind of farming the Mexica knew, and the island was far too small to feed a growing people. There was very little dry land to build houses on, and almost no stone or wood nearby for making solid things. A weaker or less clever people might have starved or given up and wandered on once more. But the Mexica had spent their whole history learning to make do with nothing, and now they put that hard wisdom to work. Slowly, patiently, they began to change the swamp itself, to reshape the land and the water to serve their needs. This work would take generations, and it would become one of the greatest feats of engineering in the ancient world. The most clever of all their inventions were the floating gardens, which were called chinampas. To build a chinampa, the Mexica would stake out a rectangle in the shallow water of the lake, sometimes as long as a small field. Then they would pile up mud from the bottom of the lake, layer upon layer, mixing in reeds and water plants, until they had built up a bed of rich, dark soil that rose just above the surface of the water. Around the edges, they planted willow trees, whose roots reached down into the lake bed and held the whole garden firmly in place. These gardens were not really floating, but they sat so low in the water that they seemed to float, and they were endlessly fertile. The lake water seeped up into the soil from below, so the crops were always watered, even in the dry season. On these gardens, the Mexica grew corn, beans, squash, peppers, tomatoes, and flowers, harvest after harvest, several times a year. The chinampas changed everything for the Mexica. A single garden could feed a family, and many gardens together could feed a city. The Mexica built these plots across the shallow waters around their island, until great stretches of the lake were turned into a patchwork of green fields, divided by narrow channels of water. Farmers paddled between their gardens in small canoes, tending their crops and gathering the harvest. The smell of wet soil and growing corn would have filled the air, and the channels would have shimmered between the rows of green. It was a strange and beautiful sight, a city of farms floating upon a lake, where land and water wove together so tightly that it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. This was how a people with almost no farmland fed themselves and grew strong, by making new land out of the lake itself. But farming was only part of the work. The Mexica also needed to make their island bigger and stronger, and they needed ways to reach the mainland. So they began to build long raised roads called causeways, made of packed earth and stone, that stretched across the water to connect their island to the shores of the lake. These causeways were wide enough for many people to walk side by side, and they had gaps in them that could be bridged or left open to let canoes pass through. In times of danger, the bridges over these gaps could be lifted away, cutting the island off completely from attackers. The Mexica also dug canals through their growing city, so that goods and people could move by boat through the very streets. In this way, the lake became not a barrier, but a highway, woven right into the heart of their home. They also had to solve the problem of fresh water, because while the lake gave them so much of its water was too salty to drink. To fix this, the Mexica later built an aqueduct, a long covered channel of stone that carried clean fresh water from springs on the mainland, all the way out to their island. This was the work of many years and many hands, and it showed how far they were willing to go to make their home livable. Every part of their city was a kind of victory wrested from the water, a sign of patience and skill. They had taken a swamp that no one wanted and were slowly turning it into a place where hundreds of thousands of people could one day live. Each chinampa, each causeway, each canal was one more step on a long road from poverty toward power. It is worth pausing to think about what this really meant. The Mexica did not stumble into greatness by luck, and they were not handed a rich and ready land. They earned their home through endless labor, scooping mud from the bottom of a lake, one basket at a time, planting willows, raising roads, digging channels, over years that stretched into lifetimes. The grandparents who first waded onto the island never lived to see the great city it would become. They worked for a future they would never witness, trusting that their children and grandchildren would carry the work forward. There is something deeply human in this, the slow building of something larger than any single life. By the time the city was grown, it stood as proof that patience and effort could turn even the poorest beginning into a wonder of the world. Even as the Mexica transformed their island into something remarkable, they were still not the masters of the valley. They were surrounded by older and stronger cities, and one of these in particular held power over them. This was the great city of Azcapotzalco, which sat on the western shore of the lake and ruled over many of the peoples around it. The Mexica, for all their cleverness with mud and water, were still subjects of this larger power. They paid tribute to Azcapotzalco, which means they handed over goods and crops as a kind of forced payment, and they fought in its wars whenever its rulers commanded. They were like a tenant who lives in a fine house he has built himself, but who must still bow to a landlord and pay rent he can barely afford. Their position was strong in some ways and weak in others. The Mexica made the best of this difficult position by becoming the finest warriors in the valley. When Azcapotzalco went to war, it was often the Mexica who marched at the front, fighting fiercely and winning battles for their overlords. With each victory, the Mexica grew more skilled, more confident, and more feared. Other cities began to respect and dread them, even as the rulers of Azcapotzalco used them as tools. The Mexica learned the arts of war, the ways of leading armies, and the politics of the valley, all while serving someone else. They watched and they remembered, storing up knowledge and strength for a day they could not yet name. It was a quiet kind of growth, hidden beneath the appearance of obedience, like a fire banked low that waits for the moment to blaze. This time of service was also a time when the Mexica began to organize themselves more fully into a true city with rulers of their own. They chose their first kings, men who could lead them in war and speak for them in the dealings between cities. The Mexica wanted their rulers to have noble blood, so they sought marriage ties with older and more respected royal families, weaving themselves into the web of power in the valley. Step by step, they were changing from a band of rough outsiders into a recognized people with kings, laws, and a growing reputation. Yet through all of it, they still answered to Azcapotzalco. The tribute still flowed out of their city, and the orders still came in. Pride was growing in the hearts of the Mexica, and pride does not bow forever. The tension between the Mexica and their overlords could not last. As the Mexica grew stronger and more numerous, the rulers of Azcapotzalco grew more suspicious and more harsh. They saw the rising power of the people they had once used so freely, and they did not like what they saw. They began to demand heavier tribute, asking for impossible gifts, and treating the Mexica with open contempt. The two cities circled each other warily, each aware that a clash was coming. The Mexica knew that if they ever wanted to be truly free, they would have to break the chains that bound them to Azcapotzalco. But Azcapotzalco was still the greater power, and to challenge it was to risk everything they had built. The decision to fight could not be made lightly, and not everyone among the Mexica was brave enough to make it. The breaking point came in the years around 1426 and 1428, when the old ruler of Azcapotzalco died, and a harsh new king took his place. This new ruler was hostile to the Mexica and seemed eager to crush them before they grew any stronger. At the same time, the Mexica themselves had a new king named Itzcoatl, a determined and capable leader who was not willing to live forever as a servant. Around Itzcoatl stood a group of bold advisors, and the most important of these was a man named Tlacaelel, whose name we should remember, for he would shape the future of his people more than almost anyone. Tlacaelel was a brilliant and ruthless thinker, a man who saw clearly what the Mexica could become if only they had the courage to seize it. He believed it was time to stop bowing and start ruling, yet the choice to go to war was filled with fear. Many among the Mexica were terrified of facing mighty Azcapotzalco, and they begged their leaders to make peace, to keep paying tribute, to do anything rather than risk total destruction. The story goes that the common people and the nobles struck a kind of bargain with one another. The nobles agreed that if the war was lost, they would surrender themselves to the enemy and accept whatever fate came. But if the war was won, then the common people promised to serve the nobles faithfully forever after, working their lands and obeying their rule. This bargain bound the whole city together in a single desperate gamble, where everyone had something to lose and everyone had something to gain. It was the kind of promise that can only be made when a people decides that freedom is worth dying for. When the war finally came, the Mexica did not stand alone. They found allies among other cities that also chafed under the rule of Azcapotzalco and longed to throw off its power. The most important of these allies was the city of Texcoco on the eastern shore of the lake, ruled by a wise and famous prince named Nezahualcoyotl, whose own family had suffered greatly at the hands of Azcapotzalco. Texcoco had its own reasons for wanting revenge, and its prince was a thoughtful and gifted leader, known not only as a warrior, but as a poet and a builder. Together, the Mexica and the people of Texcoco gathered their forces for the struggle that would decide the fate of the valley. Old grudges and new ambitions came together in a single great rebellion against the power that had ruled them all. The war against Azcapotzalco was long and hard, and it tested the Mexica to their limits. They besieged the great city, surrounding it and cutting off its food and supplies, a tactic that means slowly starving an enemy into surrender. The fighting raged across the western shore of the lake, with armies clashing among the fields and along the causeways. The Mexica and their allies pressed forward day after day, drawing on all the skill in war they had gained during their years of service. The very fighting talents that Azcapotzalco had taught them were now turned against their old masters. After much struggle and many lives lost, the great city of Azcapotzalco fell at last. The power that had ruled the valley for so long was broken, and the people who had once been its servants now stood among the victors. The fall of Azcapotzalco changed everything for the Mexica. In a single great effort, they had gone from being subjects to being a free and rising power, masters of their own fate at last. The chains of tribute were thrown off, and the Mexica took the lands and the wealth of those they had defeated. Tenochtitlan made sure that this victory was not wasted, but was used to build something lasting. They reorganized their society, rewarding the warriors and nobles who had won the war, and binding the people more tightly under the rule of the king and the nobility, just as the old bargain had promised. The Mexica were no longer the unwanted wanderers of the valley. They were now a force to be reckoned with, and the whole world around the lake would have to make room for them. It was during these years that Tlacaelel did something both strange and powerful. He gathered up many of the old painted books and records of the past, the histories kept by the Mexica and other peoples, and he had a great number of them burned. In their place, he wrote a new history, one that made the Mexica seem grander and more destined for greatness than they had been before. He shaped the story of his people to fit the glorious future he imagined for them, casting them as a chosen people meant to rule. This was a way of controlling not just the present, but the memory of the past, of deciding what would be remembered and what would be forgotten. It tells us how deeply Tlacaelel understood that power lives not only in armies but in stories, in the things a people believe about themselves. With Azcapotzalco fallen and the Mexica suddenly powerful, a new arrangement took shape that would become the foundation of their empire. The Mexica of Tenochtitlan joined together with two other cities to share the fruits of victory and to rule the valley as partners. The first of these partners was Texcoco, their loyal ally in the war, ruled by the wise prince Nezahualcoyotl. The second was a smaller city called Tlacopan, which had also turned against Azcapotzalco at the right moment. These three cities formed what we now call the Triple Alliance, a partnership that agreed to make war together and to divide the spoils of their conquests among themselves. This was not an empire ruled by a single king, but a clever bargain between three powers who found it better to cooperate than to fight one another. The Triple Alliance worked because each city brought something to the partnership, and each got something in return. When they conquered new lands together, the tribute and the wealth that flowed in were divided according to an agreed share, with Tenochtitlan and Texcoco taking the larger portions and Tlacopan a smaller one. By joining their armies, the three cities became far stronger than any of them could have been alone, strong enough to bend the whole valley and the lands beyond to their will. Of the three, Tenochtitlan slowly became the most powerful, growing richer and grander than its partners with each passing year. But for a long time the alliance held, a balance of power that let the three cities expand together without turning on one another. It was a marriage of convenience that built an empire. This way of building power tells us something important about the Aztecs. Their empire was not made only by brute force, though force was certainly part of it. It was made by careful alliances, by knowing when to fight and when to join hands, by understanding the politics of the valley as deeply as the arts of war. The Mexica had learned these lessons during their long years as servants and outsiders, watching how the powerful kept their power. Now they used that knowledge to climb to the very top. The Triple Alliance was the engine that drove their rise, the structure that turned a single city on a lake into the heart of a great empire. And as that empire grew, so did the river of wealth that flowed back toward the White City and the water. The way the Aztec Empire grew was different from the way some other empires worked. The Aztecs did not usually march into a conquered land and rule it directly with their own governors and soldiers. Instead, they defeated a city or a people in war, and then they demanded tribute, leaving the local rulers in place to govern as before, so long as the tribute kept coming. This tribute was a regular payment of goods sent to the capital, a kind of tax paid in things rather than money. As the empire spread across the land, more and more cities and peoples were brought under this system, each one sending its share of wealth toward the center. The result was a vast network of tribute that reached from the highlands to the distant coasts, all of it flowing toward Tenochtitlan. The goods that poured into the capital were astonishing in their variety. From the warm lowlands came cacao beans, which were used to make a bitter chocolate drink prized by the nobles, and which were so valuable that they were even used as a kind of money. From tropical forests came the bright feathers of rare birds, especially the long green feathers of the quetzal, used to make headdresses and ornaments of breathtaking beauty. There came gold and jade and turquoise for the craftsmen to shape, cotton for fine clothing, and rubber for the balls used in the sacred ball games. There came corn, beans, chilies, and other foods by the ton, along with woven cloth, animal skins, and countless other things. Every region of the empire sent what it had, and all of it traveled by foot and by canoe toward the city on the lake. To keep track of all this tribute, the Aztecs kept careful records in painted books, listing exactly what each conquered place owed and when it was due. Officials traveled out to the provinces to collect what was owed and to make sure no one fell behind. A people who failed to pay their tribute, or who tried to rebel, could expect the armies of the Triple Alliance to arrive and punish them. In this way, the threat of force stood behind the whole system, even when no soldiers were present. The peoples under Aztec rule often resented this heavy burden, watching their wealth carried away year after year to feed a distant city they had not chosen to serve. This resentment was quiet for now, but it did not disappear. It sat in the hearts of the conquered, waiting, as such things often do. All of this tribute made Tenochtitlan one of the richest cities in the world, and nowhere was this wealth more visible than in its great markets. The largest market was in a part of the city called Tlatelolco, and it was a wonder to behold. Tens of thousands of people gathered there on busy days, crowding among the stalls in a great open square. The noise of the market would have been a constant roar of voices, of buyers and sellers bargaining over their goods, of footsteps and laughter and calling vendors. The air would have carried the smells of cooking food, of flowers, of fresh fish from the lake, and of spices from far away. Everything in the world seemed to be for sale there, from fine jewels to simple firewood, from live birds to woven baskets, all arranged in orderly rows by what they were. The market was not a place of chaos, but of careful order. Each kind of good had its own section, so that buyers knew exactly where to go for what they needed. There were judges who sat in the market to settle disputes, and to make sure that no one cheated with false weights or bad goods. People traded using cacao beans and pieces of cotton cloth as a kind of money, along with simple barter, swapping one thing directly for another. Goods came from every corner of the empire and beyond, brought by long lines of porters who carried heavy loads on their backs, since the Aztecs had no horses or wheeled carts for hauling. To walk through this market was to see the whole empire gathered in one place, all its riches and its peoples meeting in the heart of the city on the lake. It was the beating commercial heart of a great civilization. Now we must turn to a part of the story that is harder to tell, but that we cannot leave out if we want to understand the Aztecs honestly. This is the matter of human sacrifice, and it must be told with care. To the Aztecs, the world was a fragile and dangerous place, always on the edge of ending. They believed that the sun itself was not certain to rise each day, that it had to fight a constant battle to cross the sky and bring light to the world. They believed that the gods had given their own blood and even their own lives to create the world and to keep it moving. In return, the Aztecs believed that people owed the gods a debt of blood, and that this debt had to be paid so that the sun would keep rising and the world would not fall into darkness. This belief led the Aztecs to offer human lives to their gods, especially to the sun and war god Huitzilopochtli. The sacrifices took place at the tops of the great temple pyramids, in ceremonies led by priests, and the people who were offered were most often captives taken in war. To the Aztecs, this was not cruelty for its own sake, but a sacred duty, a terrible and necessary task to keep the universe alive. They believed that without these offerings, the sun would stop, the rains would fail, and all life would end. It is a belief very far from our own, and a heavy one to sit with. We can tell the truth of it plainly, while remembering that the people who held these beliefs were human beings trying to make sense of a frightening world, just as people everywhere have always done. The need for captives shaped the way the Aztecs made war. They came to fight not only to conquer and to gather tribute, but also to take prisoners who could be offered to the gods. There even grew up a special kind of arranged warfare, sometimes called the Flower Wars, fought between the Aztecs and certain neighboring states. These were battles agreed upon by both sides, fought partly to train young warriors and partly to capture victims for sacrifice on both sides. A warrior's greatest glory came not from killing an enemy on the battlefield, but from capturing one alive to be brought back to the temples. This was a strange and grim kind of war, more like a deadly ceremony than a struggle for land. It bound the Aztecs and some of their neighbors together in a relationship of constant, ritual conflict. The number of people sacrificed by the Aztecs has been argued over for a very long time. The Spanish who later wrote about it claimed enormous numbers, but those accounts came from enemies of the Aztecs who had reasons to make them seem as terrible as possible. Modern scholars believe the true numbers were far smaller than those wild claims, though still large enough to be deeply sobering. What matters for our story is not the exact count, but the place that sacrifice held in the Aztec world. It was woven into their religion, their warfare, their calendar, and their sense of duty to the gods. It was part of what held their world together in their own minds, and part of what drove them to keep conquering, since each conquest brought new captives and new offerings. This system also served the empire in worldly ways, beyond its religious meaning. The terror of sacrifice helped keep conquered peoples obedient, since rebellion could mean being captured and offered to the gods. The great public ceremonies displayed the power of the Aztec state for all to see, awing both their own people and visitors from other lands. The nobles and warriors who took captives gained honor and status, which bound them more tightly to the empire and its wars. In this way, religion and power were tangled together so completely that it was hard to separate one from the other. The blood that the Aztecs believed they owed the sun also helped feed the machine of their empire, driving it ever outward in search of new lands and new captives. It was a belief that shaped an entire civilization. We have told this part of the story honestly, as it must be told, even in a quiet telling like this one. Now let us step back from the temples and look at the wider city, for there was so much more to the Aztecs than this dark and difficult duty. They were poets and gardeners, builders and teachers, parents and craftsmen, living rich and complex lives in one of the great cities of the world. To judge them only by their sacrifices would be to miss the fullness of who they were, just as it would be unfair to judge any people by their hardest and harshest practices alone. So let us walk now through Tenochtitlan at the height of its glory. and see the city as it stood in the days before the strangers came, when it was perhaps the most magnificent place in all the Americas. By the late 1400s, under powerful rulers such as Moctezuma I and a fierce warrior king named Ahuitzotl, Tenochtitlan had grown into a vast and dazzling city. As many as 200,000 people may have lived there, which made it larger than almost any city in Europe at the time. The city was laid out in a careful grid, divided into districts, with neighborhoods of homes and gardens spread across the island and the chinampas around it. Canals ran through the city like watery streets, and canoes glided along them carrying people and goods. Wide causeways connected the island to the mainland in 3 directions, busy with the constant traffic of those coming and going. Everywhere there was movement, the steady rhythm of a great city going about its daily life upon the surface of a shining lake. At the very center of the city stood the sacred precinct, a great walled area filled with temples, shrines, and other holy buildings. Rising above it all was the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, a towering pyramid with 2 shrines at its summit, one for the sun and war god Huitzilopochtli, and one for the rain god Tlaloc. Broad stone staircases climbed the steep sides of the pyramid to the temples at the top, where the priests performed their ceremonies high above the city. From up there, one could see the whole valley spread out below, the lake and the mountains and the towns along the distant shores. The Great Temple was the heart of the Aztec world, the place where heaven and earth were believed to meet, and it dominated the city the way a great cathedral might dominate an old town. Around the sacred center stood the palaces of the rulers and nobles, grand buildings of stone with many rooms and courtyards. The palace of the ruler was a small city in itself, with gardens, fountains, and even a zoo filled with animals and birds from across the empire. There were aviaries full of brightly colored birds, ponds with fish and water creatures, and rooms where craftsmen worked to make beautiful things for the king. The nobles lived in fine homes and dressed in cotton and feathers, while the common people lived in simpler houses of mud brick and reeds, often with small gardens of their own. Everywhere there were flowers, for the Aztecs loved flowers deeply and grew them throughout the city, on rooftops and in gardens, and floating on the canals. The smell of blossoms must have drifted everywhere on the cool mountain air. The Aztecs cared greatly for the order and cleanliness of their city, in ways that astonished those who later saw it. The streets were swept clean, and there were people whose job it was to keep them tidy. Fresh water came into the city through the great stone aqueduct from the springs of Chapultepec on the mainland, supplying the people with clean water to drink. Waste was carried away by canoe rather than left to rot in the streets. The Aztecs also valued learning, and they sent their children to schools, both the sons of nobles and the children of common people. In these schools, the young learned history, religion, songs, and the skills they would need, whether for war, for the priesthood, or for ordinary life. It was a city that took pride in itself, in its order, its beauty, and its knowledge. Standing in Tenochtitlan at its height, a visitor would have felt that they had reached the center of the world. The temples gleamed white in the sun, the markets roared with life, the canals shimmered with the passing of countless canoes, and the snow-capped mountains watched over it all from the edges of the valley. The Aztecs themselves believed their city was favored by the gods, the chosen heart of a chosen people, destined to endure and to rule. After all their long centuries of wandering and struggle, they had built something that seemed beyond the reach of any enemy, a stronghold of stone and water that no one could ever take. They could not have known that far across the great sea. In a world they had never imagined, forces were already moving that would bring everything they had built to the ground. The White City had reached its golden moment, and the golden moment would not last. The first signs of trouble came not as armies, but as strange and unsettling news from the distant coast. In the years before the strangers arrived, the Aztecs spoke of omens and dark wonders that frightened them. There were tales of a great fire seen burning in the sky, of the waters of the lake rising strangely, of voices weeping in the night. Whether all of these stories are true, or whether some were remembered and added later to explain what came after, we cannot be sure. But it is clear that a feeling of unease had crept into the city, a sense that something unknown was approaching. The ruler at this time was Moctezuma II, a proud and thoughtful king who took the warning seriously and who worried deeply about what they might mean for his people and his throne. Then, in the year 1519, the news became real. Reports reached the capital of strange men who had arrived on the eastern coast in great floating houses upon the sea, which were ships such as the Aztecs had never seen. These men had pale skin and heavy beards, and they wore hard, shining metal upon their bodies that turned aside arrows and blades. They carried weapons that made thunder and fire, and most astonishing of all, some of them rode upon great animals that no one in this land had ever beheld. These were horses, but to people who had never seen such a creature, a man on horseback seemed almost like a single strange beast, half human and half animal. The leader of these strangers was a Spanish commander named Hernán Cortés, an ambitious and ruthless man, hungry for gold and glory. We must understand how deeply confusing and frightening this must have been for the Aztecs. They had no knowledge that other lands and other peoples existed across the great ocean. Their world was the valley, the empire, and the lands they knew. And now from beyond the edge of everything had come these unknown beings with their unknown powers. Moctezuma faced a terrible question. Were these strangers men, or were they gods, or messengers of the gods? Some of the old stories spoke of a god who had departed long ago across the eastern sea and who might one day return. Could these pale newcomers be connected to such tales? The uncertainty must have been agonizing. How do you fight an enemy when you do not even know whether he is human, and when his arrival seems to match the warnings of the gods? Moctezuma chose a cautious path, one that history would judge harshly, though it is easy to judge from a safe distance. He sent messengers to the strangers bearing rich gifts of gold, fine cloth, and feathers, hoping perhaps to learn their intentions, or to satisfy them, or to honor them in case they were divine. But the gifts of gold had the opposite of their intended effect. When Cortés and his men saw the treasure, their hunger only grew sharper, for now they knew that a city of great wealth lay somewhere inland. The gifts that were meant to keep the strangers away instead drew them in, like a light drawing moths through the dark. The Spanish set their eyes on the heart of the empire, on the rich city they had heard of, and they began to make their way inland toward the lake. The slow march toward Tenochtitlan had begun. As Cortés moved inland, he revealed a cunning that would prove as dangerous as any weapon. And he understood quickly that the Aztec Empire was not a happy family, but a structure held together by force and tribute, full of peoples who hated their Aztec masters. He set out to make allies of these resentful subjects, to turn the empire's own anger against itself. The Spanish were few in number, only a few hundred men, and they could never have conquered the Aztecs alone. But if they could gather thousands of native warriors who longed to throw off Aztec rule, then their small band could become the spearhead of a vast army. This was the true genius and the true ruthlessness of Cortés, that he saw the cracks within the empire and drove his wedge into them with deadly skill. The most important of these new allies were the Tlaxcalans, a fierce and independent people who lived not far from the valley and who had never been conquered by the Aztecs. For years, the Tlaxcalans had been the enemies of the Aztecs, locked in constant war with them, including the grim flower wars fought for captives. They were surrounded by Aztec territory and burned with hatred for the empire that pressed in on them from every side. When the Spanish first met the Tlaxcalans, the two sides fought hard, and the Spanish nearly lost. But in the end, the Tlaxcalans saw in these strangers a chance to strike at the enemy they had always longed to defeat. They made peace with Cortés and joined him, sending thousands of their warriors to march alongside the Spanish toward Tenochtitlan. Along the way, the strangers and their growing army of allies showed how dangerous they could be. At the city of Cholula, a holy place allied with the Aztecs, something terrible happened. The Spanish, believing or claiming that the people of Cholula were planning to betray them, fell upon the city and killed great numbers of its people in a sudden and bloody attack. Word of this slaughter spread quickly across the land, and it spread fear with it. The strangers were not only powerful, but willing to be merciless, and many who heard the news decided it was wiser to submit or to join them than to resist. Each step of the march, Cortés grew stronger, his small Spanish force swelling with native allies who hoped to share in the fall of the hated empire. The army that approached the lake was now a great and terrible thing. At last, in November of 1519, Cortés and his army came over the mountains and looked down upon the Valley of Mexico for the first time. The sight that met them must have stolen their breath away. There below lay the great lake, shining in the sun, and rising from its waters stood the white city of Tenochtitlan, with its temples and palaces gleaming, its causeways stretching across the water, its canals threading through districts crowded with people. The Spanish had seen the great cities of Europe, and yet some of them later wrote that they had never beheld anything so wondrous as this city floating upon a lake. For a moment, conquerors and city stood facing one another, the strangers from across the sea and the marvel built by the wandering people, neither yet knowing exactly how the meeting would end. Moctezuma made the fateful choice to welcome Cortés into the city, rather than to fight him at its gates. Perhaps he still wondered whether the strangers were divine, or perhaps he hoped to learn their purpose, or to trap them within the city where they could be dealt with later. So Cortés and his men crossed the great causeway and entered Tenochtitlan as guests, walking into the very heart of the empire. Moctezuma met them with ceremony and honor, lodging them in a fine palace and showering them with gifts. For a time, the two leaders spoke and feasted together, two worlds meeting in an uneasy peace. But beneath the courtesy, both sides watched each other warily, and the city held its breath. The Spanish were now inside the strongest place in the empire, surrounded by water and by hundreds of thousands of people. It was either the safest place for them or the deadliest trap of all. The strange and tense peace within the city could not last, and soon it began to crack. Fearing for their safety inside the great city, the Spanish made a bold and shocking move. They seized Moctezuma himself and held him as a prisoner inside his own capital, keeping the great ruler under their control while pretending he still ruled freely. Through Moctezuma, they tried to govern the city and to keep its people calm, using the captive king as a kind of shield and a kind of puppet. The Aztec nobles and people watched this with growing anger and confusion. Their mighty ruler, the chosen one who spoke for the gods, was now a captive in the hands of foreign strangers. The honor of the empire was being trampled, and the patience of the people was wearing dangerously thin. A storm was gathering over the city on the lake. The breaking point came while Cortés himself was away from the city, having marched to the coast to deal with a rival group of Spaniards. He left his men in Tenochtitlan under another commander, and in his absence, things fell apart terribly. During a great religious festival, when many Aztec nobles had gathered to dance and celebrate, the Spanish soldiers attacked the unarmed crowd and killed many of them in the temple courtyard. This massacre was a spark to dry grass. The people of Tenochtitlan, who had endured so much insult, finally rose up in fury against the strangers in their midst. The whole city turned against the Spanish and their allies, attacking them, cutting them off, and laying siege to the very palace where they were lodged. The welcome had turned to war, and the trap, if it was a trap, had finally closed. Cortés hurried back to the city to find his men surrounded and desperate, with the whole population in revolt. He brought Moctezuma out to speak to his people, hoping the captive king could calm the rising storm and end the fighting. But the people had lost their faith in Moctezuma, seeing him now as a prisoner and a tool of the strangers rather than their true ruler. According to the accounts that come down to us, the crowd turned on him, throwing stones and shouting in anger, and Moctezuma was struck down. He died soon after, though the Spanish and the Aztecs told different stories about exactly how. With Moctezuma gone, the last thread of restraint snapped completely. There was no longer any hope of peace, no king to speak for calm, only a furious city, determined to drive the strangers out forever. The Spanish now knew they had to flee or die, trapped in a hostile city surrounded by water, with the causeways guarded and the bridges raised against them. They planned a desperate escape under cover of darkness. On a rainy night in the summer of 1520, the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies tried to creep out of the city along one of the great causeways, carrying with them as much gold and treasure as they could load. But the Aztecs spotted them, and the alarm went up across the city. Canoes filled with warriors swarmed out onto the dark water, and the people fell upon the fleeing strangers from every side. The causeway became a scene of chaos and slaughter in the rain and the dark, with men fighting and falling into the water on every hand. This terrible night the Spanish would later remember as the Night of Sorrows. The losses for the Spanish were dreadful. Many of their soldiers drowned in the lake, dragged down by the very gold they had tried to carry away, the treasure they had craved becoming the weight that killed them. Others were captured by the Aztecs to be sacrificed, or were cut down on the broken causeway. A large part of the Spanish force was destroyed that night, along with many of their native allies, and the survivors stumbled out of the valley, wounded and broken. For the Aztecs, it was a great victory, a moment when it seemed they had thrown off the strangers and saved their city and their empire. They had paid a heavy price, but they had driven the invaders out, and the white city still stood. For a brief and shining moment, it must have seemed that the danger had passed, and that the world had been set right again. But the victory, though real, was not the end of the danger. Cortés was wounded, and his army was shattered, yet he himself had survived, and he was not a man to give up. He retreated to the lands of his Tlaxcalan allies, who took him in and helped him recover, for their hatred of the Aztecs had not cooled. There, Cortés rested, healed his men, and began to plan his return. He gathered more allies, more weapons, and more men as fresh Spaniards arrived from the coast. The Aztecs, having won their great victory, may have believed the worst was over, but across the mountains, their enemy was rebuilding his strength. The story was not finished. The strangers would come again, and this time they would come not as guests, but as a besieging army, determined to take the city or to destroy it utterly. And there was another enemy already loose within the city, one that no warrior could fight and no causeway could keep out. The strangers from across the sea had brought with them diseases unknown in this land, and chief among them was smallpox. The people of the valley had never been touched by this sickness before, and so their bodies had no defense against it at all. The disease spread through Tenochtitlan and across the whole region like fire through dry brush, striking down young and old, noble and commoner alike. People burned with fever and broke out in terrible sores, and they died in vast numbers, faster than the living could bury the dead. The plague swept away a huge part of the population in a matter of months, weakening the city from within just as its greatest trial approached. The toll of the sickness is hard to imagine. Whole families perished together, and the streets and houses of the great city filled with the dying and the dead. Among those killed by the plague was the brave young ruler who had led the Aztecs during the uprising against the Spanish, leaving the people without his leadership at the worst possible time. The disease did not care for rank or courage or faith. It struck down warriors who had fought off the strangers, leaving the city weaker in body and in spirit. This invisible enemy did more damage than any Spanish sword, and it spread far beyond the valley, racing ahead through lands the strangers had not yet even reached. The world of the Aztecs was being hollowed out from the inside, even as the army of Cortés prepared to return and finish what it had started. When Cortés came back to the valley in 1521, he came prepared for a long and total war. He had built small ships, which the Aztecs called the floating fortresses, designed to be carried in pieces and then put together to sail upon the lake itself. With these ships, the Spanish could control the water that had always been the city's great protection, cutting off the canoes that brought food and fighters to the island. Cortés, also had a great host of native allies, tens of thousands of warriors from Tlaxcala and other peoples who longed to see the Aztecs fall. He surrounded the city on every side, seizing the causeways and the towns along the shore. The siege of Tenochtitlan had begun, and it would be one of the longest and most terrible sieges in the history of the world. The Aztecs defended their city with extraordinary courage. They had a new and determined young ruler named Cuauhtémoc, who led the defense with fierce resolve and would never surrender. The people fought from their rooftops, their canals and their causeways, hurling spears and stones, attacking the Spanish ships, and fighting hand to hand in the narrow streets. Time and again they drove the attackers back, making them pay dearly for every step into the city. But the noose was tightening. The Spanish ships ruled the lake and cut off the supply of food and fresh water to the island. The aqueduct that brought clean water from the mainland was destroyed. Slowly, the great city that had thrived on the lake for 200 years was being strangled, deprived of the very water and food that had always sustained it. The suffering inside the city grew beyond words as the siege wore on through the weeks and months. Without fresh water or enough food, the people began to starve and to die of thirst, as well as of wounds and disease. They ate whatever they could find, the bark of trees, the creatures of the lake, anything at all. Still they would not give up, holding on to their city and their honor, even as everything around them crumbled. The Spanish and their allies fought their way deeper into the city, street by street, and as they advanced, they tore down the buildings behind them, filling the canals with rubble so that the Aztec canoes could not strike at them. Block by block, the great city was being destroyed, even as it was being conquered. Its temples and palaces broken into ruins, its people falling in their thousands. After about 3 months of this terrible siege, the city could hold out no longer. The defenders were starving, sick, and exhausted, hemmed into a small corner of the ruined city with no hope of relief. In August of 1521, the young ruler Cuauhtémoc tried to escape across the lake by canoe, perhaps hoping to rally resistance elsewhere, but he was captured by the Spanish. With his capture, the last organized defense came to an end, and the great city of Tenochtitlan fell at last. The fighting stopped, and a heavy silence settled over what had been one of the most magnificent cities in all the world. The white city on the lake, built by the wandering people over 2 centuries of patient labor, lay broken and conquered, its streets filled with rubble and its people scattered and grieving. An empire that had risen from a swamp had come to its end. This is a moment to hold quietly, for it marks the passing of a whole world. The Aztecs had built something truly remarkable, a great civilization with its own art, its own learning, its own deep beliefs, and its own astonishing city upon the water. All of this was not erased in an instant, but it was broken and changed forever in those terrible months. We can mourn what was lost, while also holding the full truth of what the Aztecs were, a people of brilliance and beauty, and also of harshness and conquest. Like so many great powers in history, their fall came from many things at once, from the courage and cunning of their enemies, from the diseases they had no defense against, and from the deep resentments within their own empire that turned so many against them. The story of the Aztecs is, in the end, a deeply human one. What came after the fall is the final part of our story. On the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish built a new city, which they called Mexico City, the capital of a new colony that would last for 300 years. They tore down the great temples and used their stones to build their own churches and palaces, raising a new world directly upon the bones of the old. Over the long years that followed, the great lake that had been the heart of the Aztec world was slowly drained away, bit by bit, until almost nothing of it remained. Today, the vast modern city stands upon dry land where the shining water once spread, and only a few canals in one old district still whisper of the lake that used to be. The waters that once carried canoes and reflected the white temples have faded almost entirely from the surface of the earth. Yet the Aztecs were never truly erased. Their blood still flows in the millions of people of Mexico today, and their language, called Nahuatl, is still spoken by many. Words from their tongue have spread across the whole world, hidden in everyday speech, in the names of foods like chocolate and the tomato. The image of the eagle on the cactus, the very sign that led the wandering Mexica to their island home so long ago, sits at the center of the Mexican flag, honored by a whole nation. Beneath the streets of the modern city, the ruins of the great temple have been uncovered, and people walk among the old stones where the priests once climbed toward the sky. The past has not vanished. It rests just below the surface, the way the old lake rests beneath the city, remembered even when it cannot be seen. We have traveled a long way together tonight, from a band of weary wanderers searching for a home, to the rise and fall of one of the greatest empires the Americas ever knew. We have watched a people turn a swamp into a wonder, climb from servitude to power, and build a city that astonished all who saw it, before the coming of strangers and sickness brought it down. Now let the story settle, like the quiet that falls over water when the wind dies down at the end of the day. Picture the old lake as it might have looked on a still night long ago, its surface smooth and dark, the white city glowing softly under a wide and gentle moon. The canoes are tied up along the shore, the markets are quiet, and the only sound is the faint lapping of water against the reeds. The whole valley breathes slowly in the cool night air, at peace, holding its long story in the dark. Rest now, and let that still water carry you gently into sleep. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be as deep and calm as the lake that once held a city of stars.